I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we welcome back to the show Jim Bavard, the libertarian gadfly and author of such books as Public Policy Hooligan, Attention Deficit Democracy, and The Bush Betrayal. Once upon a time, Jim covered the siege at Ruby Ridge, a textbook case of federal government overreach. And now he is revisiting that case in light of the federal killing of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis, a 37-year-old VA nurse slain by U.S. Customs and Border Protection this past weekend. Many MAGA supporters were rather upset when Jim drew the comparison to Ruby Ridge, but he's not backing down, and he says the parallels are very real. We'll get into those parallels in the conversation to follow. But before we do that, I need to remind you that it is you, the listener, that makes this show possible, along with my one and only sponsor, Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com. Other than Mike, though, this show is entirely listener-funded, and I could use your support at Patreon. Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. One more time, that's Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. A note to my $10 tier and above supporters. Please email me if you haven't heard your name in the producer's credit at the end of the program. I can be reached at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com. Sometimes I am not getting the email updates on new subscribers to the $10 and above tier. So if you can, please contact me. Again, at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com if you are a $10 and above tier supporter. And also, listeners, if you can, please check out WallStreetWindow.com, the website of my sponsor, Mike Swanson. Mike's newsletter offers the best financial and trading news, and I've actually had listeners make a return on investment from Mike's trading tips, so check out WallStreetWindow.com. And if you sign up to the newsletter, I believe you can also get a copy of Mike's free ebook, The Twofold Formula, the single best trading pattern I have ever used. So once again, that's WallStreetWindow.com. And with that being said, let's get right to the conversation with Jim Bavard. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a guest that I always enjoy having on. He is an astute thinker and commentator, Ambassador Patrick Theros. Welcome back to Parallax Views.
Thank you very much, JJ. I really appreciate it. I enjoy this every time I join you.
Well, I wanted to have you back on because you wrote a piece in December, or late December, 2025, what I got right, what I got wrong, and why 2026 looks worse. So what are your biggest takeaways from year one of the second Trump presidency?
I was right in generally speaking. It has gotten worse. The president has come up with more different ways to surprise us, confuse us, and scare us.
Right.
And I'm amazed at how quickly those roll off and how difficult it is for anyone to keep track, let alone cope with what's going on.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, in terms of just domestically, let's start with that. Where did you see things going, and how quickly did things actually escalate? Because I feel like you were able to predict a lot domestically, but it also ended up happening a lot faster than I think you would have expected.
Yes. I am not sure of this thesis, but I believe that there was an attempt by people in the circle of Trump, perhaps even more than Trump, to create a situation where the reaction would be an overreaction and where they could clamp down and come down harder across the country, particularly in democratic cities. The reason I say I don't think Trump was part of this is in part because he's trying to do everything at the same time, and he has made every significant decision and then moves on to the next one. In foreign affairs, that is potentially catastrophic. In domestic affairs, it means he really doesn't have time to do any conspiring. So I frankly believe that some of the people in the MAGA crowd who are using Trump as a bit of a useful idiot to see how they can accrue more power are trying to create resistance and then crack down on that resistance. What is going on now in terms of chasing down the odd illegal immigrant or undocumented immigrant, it bears no resemblance to an organized campaign to actually do it. They are out there stirring up trouble. I was watching a video of a woman whose house was breached. I mean, the doors of the house were breached at 6 o'clock in the morning, in the full knowledge that everyone in the house was an American citizen who had had a altercation with ICE or some other federal authority the night before. All this designed to provoke reactions and allow things to come down. And Greg Bovino, whether knowingly or just because it's part of his character of a cop gone rogue, possibly, was in the height of it trying to stir things up. And then ICE killed Alexander Petri. And they did it in front of a couple of dozen people videotape anymore, but recording this on their telephones. And it was obvious that they had actually disarmed him, pinned him to the ground, and then they shot him. That set things off. And the next day, Bovino gets transferred. There's some silly statement out of the White House that it's not a demotion. And Horman goes out now to take charge of things directly. So I think this is Trump waking up to the fact that things are being done in his name for the benefit, perhaps not his benefit necessarily, but for the benefit of something else. And since I'm questioning Trump's attention to detail more than anything else, or simply being unable to chew 16 different kinds of gum at the same time and walk, is what's going on with Gaza. Trump momentarily makes incursions into the Middle East space, slaps down Netanyahu, and then says we're going to do this, and Netanyahu bends the knee, and then Trump goes off and gets involved in something else, and Netanyahu does everything possible he can to undo what he has just agreed to doing. And then Trump comes back, and then Trump moves the needle forward again, and then goes away and does something else. In the Middle East, Trump's biggest problem is he's dealing with states rather than with ordinary citizens in the street. And the consequences of missteps are much worse in many ways, though I can't think of things much worse than what's going on in Minneapolis domestically, but they're much worse. There are more powerful players, and frankly, he doesn't have a great team of seasoned diplomats running interference for him while he's off solving some other world problem or ending the Eighth War, pursuing the Nobel Peace Prize. So we're in a situation where Trump doesn't seem to be really in control. He issues manifestos, he does things, he tells people what he wants them to do. Everybody says, yeah, we'll do it, boss. And then a large number of the players are off doing something else, or they are doing things contradictory. They're doing things that they seem to want to do. And the rational people who could oppose them on the other side, the Republican Party is still with a few minor defections, still in a, how can I say this, a state of suspended animation out of fear. And the Democrats are still trying to figure out who they are and where they are and what they are, rather than
Okay,
do anything.
if I could, based on your experiences as a diplomat and understanding of statecraft, why do you get this impression that it sounds like you're saying Trump is getting played in some ways by people within his administration? Am I misreading that, or that they're doing things that he isn't necessarily even signing off on, and that's causing him problems? What gives you that impression?
The impression is was I was getting that impression in that what ICE was doing in Minneapolis was astounding. There aren't that many. I mean, they almost outnumbered the undocumented immigrants total number in Minneapolis. The gratuitous attacks on American citizens, the willingness to decide that the two people that have been killed by ICE were terrorists and put that thing out without any hesitation indicates to me that these people have an agenda, and the agenda doesn't square with what we know of Trump. I mean, he doesn't really like chaos. If he has chaos, he prefers it to be the kind of chaos that he would control. Now, he's given them general license to go and do this. His instructions are, in the final analysis, his instructions are pretty vague. And then, just for a second, let's shift to Venezuela, that first or second boat they sank. I doubt very much that Hegseth consulted with Trump before he ordered SOCOM to kill the survivors. And I'm absolutely astounded that SOCOM agreed to do it. That is just not the thing that a professional soldier or an admiral in the U.S. Navy would normally agree to. I mean, that is straight up an illegal order. So that, partly it's that the system is now run by people who are out there, and it could just be arrogance, grandiosity, people with Napoleonic complexes. He is not surrounded by the A-team. So I'm not, at least in domestic affairs, I am not convinced that this is so much a conspiracy as a bunch of incompetent glory hounds running around trying to show how tough they are. Internationally, it's a different story.
Almost like a Keystone Cops situation.
Yes, except with the full power of the United States government behind them.
I'm curious. I want to get into more of what you saw in 2025, but do you find any parallels to history, or as someone who's been involved in diplomacy and statecraft, do you have any insights you can share that can give a better picture of what is happening? Do you see any parallels in history?
Internationally, Trump, let me say, internationally, we've had periods of time after major empires have collapsed that have some relationship to the way that the end of the liberal world order, the globalization, is coming to an end. The liberal world order really was an American empire. As empires go, it was a great deal nicer than others. We still milked it to our benefit. We benefited more than anybody else did for the longest time. We were the guys calling the shots, except with regard to the Soviet Union, which, though it was big in territory and had a lot of nuclear weapons, never was able to seriously project its power into our domain and seriously threaten us. Cuba being perhaps the only example, and even now, and then Cuba just became an annoyance for us and a liability for the Soviets. So when that empire came apart, we seem to be moving back to what preceded it, which was a multipolar world with a balance of power. Try to look for the best. We're just sort of the bigger power is trying to balance things and trying to keep things from getting out of hand while they go ahead and try and benefit from it using their superior power. Uh, and it's been a long time since when the British Empire died, it was lucky, the world was lucky, because the US moved in right behind it and took it over. So you've got to go back perhaps, you got to go back a long time, perhaps to the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, not when the Turks took it in 1453, but when the empire fell apart in the 10th or the 11th century, actually leading to the sack of Constantinople. At that point, it was different. Essentially, everybody who was on the outside just came charging in to pick the pieces up, and we had multiple powers, but they didn't do a very good job of keeping the peace in those days. So this is what's going on now is a little bit unique. We are now transitioning out of the American empire, the liberal world order, the globalization, into a situation that was very similar to what was happening prior to World War I, which was the multiplicity of powerful states or near empires that were competing both for trade and for power. They didn't really want to go to war with each other. Except in far-flung places, the Napoleonic Wars had devastated Europe, and no one wanted to repeat that again. And so we had a period between 1815 and 1915, actually a little earlier than that, in which wars in Europe were small wars. They were confined wars. And the major powers would rush over there as soon as they showed signs of getting bigger, and would throw water on the fire and tamp down on the minor states. And then something went terribly wrong in August of 1914. And we ended up where we ended up. So we seem to be, if I can put that in a term, we seem to be retrogressing to where things were before the liberal world order, before World War I, before everything that led up, before the collapse of the old system and the end of the new system.
The word I hear is like spheres of influence.
Sorry?
Are we moving back to a sort of spheres of influence?
Yeah, I mean, we are very much. And and I think Trump is pretty explicit about it. He's got us, in his view, and now I'm trying to do a psychoanalysis, which may be unfair, but in his view, he sees four major powers, or three major powers, actually. He sees himself running the United States, and our sphere of influence is the Western Hemisphere, which includes a undetermined border between the American sphere of influence and the Chinese sphere of influence on the other side of the Pacific. We haven't figured out quite, or Trump hasn't really figured out quite where those places interact. And on the other side, Trump sees Russia as the third major power in the world and would frankly try to destroy the possibility that Europe could be a major power. He sees Europe as fit for looting if he can dismantle the EU and make NATO a dead letter. And then he would just be competing with the Russians with who grabs the best parts first. But it would be raids in to grab things, trying to bring countries under your sphere of influence. And So the competition between China and the US and between the US and Russia in Trump's mind would be kept at a distance from the homeland, at a great distance from the homeland, where we're competing in the indeterminate area, someplace in the Western Pacific and someplace in Europe. Africa, for some reason, seems to does not exist in his view. And so I think he's wrong. I think we're going to see other centers of power coming up. I think he has grossly overestimated the power of Russia. China and the US are the only two superpowers right now. China is an interesting superpower in that it has economic ambitions. It has the idea of becoming the dominant economic power in the world, but I don't believe that China now or ever has shown an interest in gobbling up big pieces of territory. Russia has, but like I said, Russia without nuclear weapons is not a superpower. Russia without nuclear weapons is a secondary power. If the Indians ever get their act together, they could probably be a secondary power of the same, say, strength as Russia. And I think they will in time, frankly, because the Indians are afraid of the Chinese. And at the same time, they may see the need to support Russia against China. India and Russia have enough reason to be natural allies. Now, if Putin continues to play his hand badly in the Ukraine, he may so weaken Russia that he will be unable to compete with China. He may not fall into the Chinese sphere of influence entirely, but he will be very dependent on China, both as his only really big customer, China and India, customer for oil and gas, and as a potential ally to prevent Europe from getting too big to deal with. The real question for me is, will Europe get its act together and become another near superpower? In other words, the biggest regional power. There are other countries that are maneuvering to become powers like that. Turkey is trying very hard to establish its influence in the region. It could become a serious second-tier power, though I doubt it. But it will try. And I have no idea what's going on in Latin America at the moment. Trump wants to keep the whole area as an area of influence, sphere of influence for the United States. It requires a lot. One of the problems is he is destroying or undermining the instruments that the United States would need if we were going to play that game. First of all, he is destroying our diplomatic outreach. He's cut the Foreign Service in half. He's fired ambassadors right and left. He has destroyed all the elements of soft power that we use to maintain a sphere of influence. Spheres of influence are not maintained just by military force, because then you end up with what the Russians have. You no longer have willing allies, you have slaves. And slaves who are ripe for a revolution when one of the other powers comes along. So he is literally, in his mind, he believes that if he just has this overwhelming military power, he can cow obedience. He can demand obedience, but it's not the kind of obedience that really helps the dominant power. Think of it in sort of a feudal relationship. The king has his barons, all of whom have their big estates, and the king really doesn't care how the barons run their place as long as they swear fealty to him, as long as they pay him tribute and taxes, and as long as they support him if he has to go to war. But to do that, he has to have a pretty friendly relationship with the barons. He can't do it on a if you don't play games, if you don't play along, I'm gonna kill you, because pretty soon the barons are all going to get together, and you end up with what happened in 1215 in England when the barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. King John lost the what's the word I'm looking for? He lost the trust of his barons. And right now we are losing trust and confidence all over the world. This he's done two very stupid things in dealing in the last month, in the last week. One has been this Greenland caper. I can't even describe it. The imbecilic way in which he went about it is about the best term I can think of. I cannot even figure out exactly what he had in mind. Did he really believe that by posturing he could get the Danes to surrender Greenland? Other than the fact that Greenlanders don't want it, the Danish government wouldn't last a day past their surrendering Greenland. And for the Europeans, this would be such a dangerous precedent if they didn't back Greenland. I want Greenland. I can take it. Putin wants Ukraine. So now Putin's justified in taking Ukraine. Turkey wants the Greek islands in the Aegean. Turkey would be justified in this case. So what worries me is he is undoing the institutions that the United States would need to run a sphere of influence, not only over the Western Hemisphere, over North and South America, but extending out into the Atlantic and trying to compete with Russia and Europe and compete with China in the Western Pacific. That takes we now have we had a foreign service when it came to power of about 4,000 diplomats. We're now down to about 2,000, 2,500, and all the new junior classes have been fired, and all the senior people are resigning or being fired. So he has emasculated the foreign service. He has done away with all the instruments of soft power, AID, USIS, everything that we do abroad, the Voice of America and so forth. And he's also undermining another huge element of American soft power, politically and economically and technologically. He's going after the universities. The universities are in my view, the single most powerful soft power projection instrument that the United States possesses. There's nothing like it. Our universities lead in so many fields, and they lead because the federal government has been helping them along with big grants for research and things like that, and we helping them recruit students from abroad, half of whom stay here and create unicorns. I mean, this is our single biggest instrument of soft power, and he seems determined to undermine it. And I don't know who sold him that bill of goods. Sorry, I've gone on and on.
Well, I wanted to comment on that because I keep trying to tell people, especially people that may be MAGA curious or may think that that have put their lot in with Trump. I don't think that might makes right is a formula for responsible statecraft, and I think these people that think that are forgetting the lessons of history. I keep referencing to people, Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War. People always quote that line, the weak or the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. But people forget that didn't necessarily work out for the Athenians in the end. Their own recklessness does come back to haunt them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is and I'm trying to remember because there's a sequel to that line in which Thucydides says something because you really piss people off afterwards if you do it wrong. And I mean, it's what the Athenians did. The Athenians had organized the Delian League, and I think at the beginning, the Delian League could rightly be compared to NATO, an alliance of like-minded countries, most of whom had some form of democratic regimes, most of whom depended on trade with each other and with Athens and with the outside world, all of whom were engaged in sending colonies out beyond the Hellenic world. And then Athens got greedy. And one of the big advantages they had over the Spartans was the Spartans weren't seagoing people. And the Athenian fleet, which was also a fleet of allies, could always, the Spartans could win land campaigns, but they couldn't venture out to sea. And then there's one particular case where Chios, one of the bigger islands in the Aegean, the island my mom comes from, was the second biggest naval power after Athens. Athens decided that they wanted something, or I forget the details, but they went and imposed a government on Chios, which had been run by aristocrats rather than Democrats, and killed a lot of people. And then the old Chians came back, took over, and the fleet of Chios joins the Spartan fleet. And all of a sudden, Athens didn't have control of the seas anymore. So that is a very bad example. You can go on with that. You don't push around your best allies. You do not. You do not demean them. The other thing that a lot of Americans seem to forget, and I'm surprised that we do, because it shouldn't be. It's not part of our culture, but we seem to believe that foreigners aren't entitled to dignity and respect. And it doesn't work on us if you disrespect us. Why should we think that if we deny the other fellow his own dignity, that they should respect us? It's I don't know where we are going. I mean, I'm reasonably confident that unless one of two things happen, Putin goes under for some reason, his economy collapses and something like that, and Ukraine wins the war, or Trump or something. Trump either pulls all the support, starts supporting Putin against Ukraine, or makes it possible for others not to be able to, forbids others from helping Ukraine. He can do that just by saying, okay, I'm not going to send you any more spare parts for your equipment, and I'm not going to send Europe spare parts to replace any spare parts they may send you. So those are the only two scenarios I can see where one side or the other wins in the Ukraine. Otherwise, the Ukraine war is going to go on.
It'll just keep grinding.
Just keep grinding. The Russians are going to win another 0.37% of Ukrainian territory and kill 200,000 young Russians doing it. Yeah, by the end of the year. It's a dreadful war, but unless this is wars like World War One. World War One came to an end because Germany imploded. Even though Germany was actually winning, technically speaking, when the Germans showed up to surrender to the French, the English, and the Americans, they were winning. And all of a sudden, they weren't. This is one of the reasons it caused Hitler, because when World War One ended, the German army still stood on territory of foreign countries that they had conquered. And try to explain that to your population afterwards. But they had. I mean, it simply was Germany could no longer sustain the war effort.
I wanted to.
Yeah,
no, go on. I'm sorry.
No, I was about to say I've been going on and on. So,
well, I wanted to ask you on the economic front, because I have listeners from all across the spectrum, and I have listeners that are like uh, boosters of domestic industry. They'd like to see more money put into domestic industry. And I would argue that we were seeing some of that with Biden and his so-called Bidenomics, especially with the CHIPS
Mhm.
Act. So
Right.
there is sort of a protectionist strain that I've seen with
Oh,
some of
very
my
strong.
fellow citizens. But I actually think Trump's policies aren't necessarily going to benefit American industry. Can you speak to that? Because you talked about how there's an internal contradiction.
Yeah, I did a paper recently, I don't know if you saw it, in which I talked about the futility of making America maritime again. The It's not going to happen. We were once the dominant maritime power in the world. I'm talking about the merchant marine now, not the Navy. We owned more ships than anybody did. We built more ships than anybody could build, and we could pump them out. In World War II, we were pumping out a Liberty ship every week or 10 days. Uh, but those days are gone. Uh, they're gone because of a lot of self-inflicted policies, and they're gone because the world moved on and changed. People are going to build their own shipyards. New shipyards are more competitive than old shipyards. They're because they've invested in them, and you got to invest in old shipyards to bring them up to the standards of the new ones being out there. We cost more, and two, as we become a more prosperous country, we nobody wants to go to sea. Referring to Chios is the par excellence seagoing island in the world. Its own people from Chios own half the Greek merchant marine, which is the biggest merchant marine in the world today. They are finding it impossible to recruit young people from Chios to go off and be man that merchant marine because the Greek economy has improved to the point where uh, it's much nicer if you're graduating from high school. You can either decide to go to one of the merchant marine academies, go off to sea, or go to a local college, then get a government job. The job at sea may pay 2 or 3 times as much as the job on land does, net, but I don't want to go to sea and be stuck on a ship for 18 months, in which now with all the modern equipment, we spend exactly 18 hours in port and we're gone, and I never got off the ship for 18 months. My idea of going ashore is to go sit on the pier for 10 minutes before I'm called back inside. And that is the life at sea today. Uh, and then in the United States, where our salaries at sea are at best equivalent to this salaries at land, it is really hard to get somebody to go be a seaman. And then we have the Jones Act, which is stupid because it requires that every cargo that is carried from one American port to another, and that includes San Diego to Hawaii, or San Diego to Alaska, or say Charleston to Puerto Rico, has to be carried on a ship that flies the American flag, was built in the United States, and has only Americans as crewmen. And then we ask why do we not have a merchant marine anymore? It becomes very difficult. The Greeks retained their control of the merchant marine because now they are happily recruiting Filipinos, Yemenis, Ukrainians to man their ships. The only Greeks on the ships tend to be the top two guys. And everybody else is a foreigner, but they still own the ships and they're still running them. You don't fight a battle that you can't win. We cannot win. On shipyards have a whole integrated system of building all sorts of things that go into ships. Building a ship is like building a large apartment building or building a factory. It's not like turning out cars. It requires a highly specialized chain of industries behind it. Those have all gone. And they've gone because they weren't readily convertible to building things on land. They Chinese now have got that infrastructure in place. The Europeans, the Japanese, and the Koreans have got that infrastructure in place. And we'd have to spend billions upon billions to rebuild the chain, and two, train the technicians who can work that chain all the way up from getting the proper kind of steel, because you can't use any kind of steel on a ship, get the proper kind of steel all the way up to launching the ship at the other end. And the way Trump is going about doing that is he's trying to put fees and penalties on Chinese-made ships and on all foreign ships coming to the United States. Well, what that does is it raises the cost of doing business for Americans enormously. Today, against a promise that's going to be 20 years down the line if it ever materializes. Even if he just spends money to build shipyards, the only people going to make money out of those shipyards are the construction companies that built them. Those shipyards, if you just build a shipyard, it's not going to build a ship. You've got to build a train that goes way back. My view right now is we're about to sign a contract with the Koreans, and we can't even build warships properly because our shipping industry is in such trouble. It is so complicated, so old, so unmodern, for want of a better term, and because everybody, even the U.S. Navy, has lost their touch on how do you procure a ship, how do you design and procure a ship. And I'll give you two examples. We're struggling to build a nuclear submarine every 2 or 3 years. We're about to write a contract with the Koreans, where the Koreans will build nuclear submarines for themselves on license from an American company. And they're going to build, I think the number is 7, in the period of time it takes us to build 3 or 2. There's another, the U.S. Navy decided that they needed a new advanced frigate. And for the first time, they said, let's go to a foreign design. And the French and Italians got together and designed a really nifty frigate called the FDI, which is run jointly by the French and the Italians. The two French and Italian version are slightly different, but they're very, very similar. And it's a very effective ship. And we went to the Italians and said, we'd like to get a license to copy your ship. Italians are happy to do that. It costs money, but they do it. And then we said about, well, the Italian ship's a little bit too small for us. Got to make it bigger so you can go further. And, we don't like the Italian gun because it's manufactured in Italy, so why don't we use another American gun? Which means that we'll put that on it, and then you got to redesign everything in the front part of the ship to accommodate the American gun as opposed to the Italian gun. And then we changed the radars on it, which means you had to rewire and change. So at the end, it's called the Constellation class. It now weighs 7,000 or 8,000 tons. It is being built in Wisconsin. The first one is a year and a half to 2 years behind schedule, and it's going to cost roughly $1.4 billion to build. The second one has just been laid down, and they've decided to go ahead with it, and then they've canceled the line. Meanwhile, between the time we started on the project and today, Greece went to the French and said, we like your frigate. We'd like 4 standard French frigates with some minor reconfiguring to meet our needs. They negotiated the reconfiguring in about 6 months, ordered 4 frigates. 18 months later, the first frigates of the Greek Navy. And the cost for all 4 frigates is $2.2 billion. roughly half the cost. What is the difference between them? The Greek frigates are smaller and can't stay at sea for as long as the American designed frigates. On the other hand, the radars on the Greek frigates are just as good as they are, and the armament on the Greek frigates are significantly superior to the armament we're putting on our Constellation class frigates. You know, there's something really wrong here, and we would be far better off by going to the French and saying, you know what, you want to take over our shipyard? And why don't you build 4 frigates for us, and then build the rest in our shipyard here. But you take it over and you run it, because we've lost all the skills of running it, and a lot of the parts are going to come from abroad to build it. Or you can't do it any other way right now if you want to build a fleet as big as the Chinese fleet, which is now building ships faster than we can replace our ships.
So how does this example that you're giving tie into the bigger picture with regards to economics and industry in the US?
Because you don't rebuild an industry based on tariffs that are hurting you today, in hopes that you will get 10 years from now, because you got to look at things in the 5 to 10 or 20 year, in the hopes that 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, you will have a competitive industry. But remember, you're building a non-competitive industry to begin with. If the Chinese can drop a car in San Diego for 10,000, say nobody's got a $10,000 car anymore. Let's say for $40,000, a electric car, it's got all the same bells and whistles, and General Motors is struggling to compete, but it is competing. But it is struggling to compete. So we put a tariff on that car that raises the price of the car to $60,000. Well, General Motors is now building cars for a market where his best competition, his scariest competition, can't sell for less than 60,000. So why should he build a car for less than 60 and 59,900? It's building tariffs. The only time you put tariffs on are there are 3 circumstances for tariffs in any good economics course. So the first one, you can have a very small tariff. It's called a revenue tariff. Typical revenue tariff was the tariff that ancient Athens, this goes back a long way, put on any cargo coming into Athens, which was 4% ad valorem, 4% of the value. It's not big enough to make a difference, but it generates a nice income for the state. So there's a revenue tariff. Then there's a tariff, which is basically a defensive tariff. Somebody else has put a tariff on you, so screw you. I'm gonna hurt you until you lower your tariffs on my industry. And the third one, and this is where defense industries have an advantage that others don't. You have to have a defense industry. If you're a major power, you have to have a defense industry. And I don't care if my M1 tank costs 20% more than the comparable French version or the German version, or 30% more than the comparable Korean version. If I'm going to build a tank, I got to build a tank in my country. And there I can afford rebuilding an industry. You can afford rebuilding a defense industry. Most of that, by the way, is not rebuilding it. Most of it is clearing out the deadwood. This is both in the military procurement program process and in the way that the defense industries, when the Cold War ended, 5 companies bought up 90% of everything that was producing. And we've got to do a really big Teddy Roosevelt out there and break up these big defense companies. They're good people. They're hardworking people, those defense companies. But when you've only got 5 companies in a $1 trillion market, you're not going to get efficiencies. You're not going to get fast turnaround. And you've got to fix the way that the but the Defense Department procures things because when you only have five companies, five huge companies, the influence they bring to the Defense Department is enormous. That we want you to design, we want you to ask for airplanes that we make. We don't want you to ask. We don't want you to just go out and say this is the design we want. Who's competitive? You don't compete anymore between companies very much.
So, well, I was just going to ask, you said that your assumption that market discipline would restrain the excess of this cycle. You describe it as tariffs rise, immigration enforcement turns theatrical, prices creep upwards, and trade wars generate volatility. Why do you think market discipline did not restrain this?
Um, because it was a lot of it was out of whack to begin with. A lot of what we like, but take the industry, take the defense industry. It was just out of whack. We have allowed things to deteriorate. Uh, I would agree that there's an enormous amount of waste in the United States government. That waste is not product of a couple of the 300,000 civil servants that have lost their jobs. That waste is a product of all the demands that is made on it. And I'm not just talking about environmental requirements, but the way Congress interferes in US government procurement, the way everything that is built nowadays is built so that some congressman can go out there and cut a ribbon, uh, so that the finance people have inordinate power. They're the principal reason why the Rust Belt was created. My mom's family all lives in Warren, Ohio. Used to be a biggest steel plants in the country were owned by people from Warren, Ohio, and they were just down the road in Youngstown or in Warren or elsewhere. And when the companies, the ownership was living there, then when they got old, they sold their company to who? Hedge funds and private equity. And the owners moved to Florida, and the hedge funds now took the ownership to New York. So for the guy living in New York, is it better for me to invest new money in building a factory picket in China or in India or someplace like that, or to invest in the legacy company where I've got union labor and I'm paying more? So it was the finance industry still controls most of the capital in the country. The finance industry is, and they're not bad people. It's just they're doing what the system was designed to do. We took off all the controls of the Teddy Roosevelt era. We took out all the controls of the Franklin Roosevelt era. Clinton killed the banking regulations of the Depression.
Yeah, Glass-Steagall, right?
Spiegel, and I couldn't remember the first part of the name. Anyway, Glass-Steagall, and all of a sudden, the finance industry is doing what they're supposed to do, which is go out and make the maximum amount of money for the fewest number of people possible. And you do that by loading companies up with loans. You take the loans. The loan is owned by this company. The company goes bankrupt. I don't care. I've got my stockholders, both of them, to make happy. So we've got a lot of homework to do. We have to really insulate the U.S. government from all the lobbying that goes on, and which means we have to somehow or other, and I don't know how to do this, take a lot of the money out of politics. We have to go back to the Teddy Roosevelt era of killing monopolies. To me, five companies running the defense industry in the United States is unthinkable. We didn't win World War II that way. And we have to go out and rebuild the infrastructure, which we're starting. I mean, I'll give Biden credit for that. He deserves credit for building the infrastructure, and we have to relook at the way we collect taxes. not just how much we collect, but the way we collect them. Because the way we collect them damages the U.S. economy anyway. They, you know how many billions of dollars are spent on accountants?
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of that much.
Yeah, but I can't do my own income tax. I really can't. I was doing my own income tax until I retired from the Foreign Service. And then I went into business. We started a consulting company. I took another job and so forth. So all of a sudden, my taxes became complicated. And then I bought a house and I started renting it out. And they became really complicated. And I would finish my tax return and I would say, I cannot swear that I actually know what I've done here. And then I turned to, was it TurboTax? And I did that for about 3 years, 4 years. And I had that same horrid feeling. TurboTax would ask me questions that I couldn't answer. And then I had that same horrid feeling when I was signing this. And then I went to an accountant. And the first accountant was really cheap and he cheated me.
Oof.
Now I got an accountant that charges more, but at least I think he's not cheating me.
So it sounds like we need a lot of changes.
Yeah, we have really got to. So just that amount of just making the tax system easier. Go to a VAT. You can have the states have a VAT. Uh, make the income tax system, take all the exemptions out of it.
What do you say to the people? I know there's going to be people that say, "Oh, the VAT. I always hear Europe that has the VAT and it's horrible." What do you say to the people that have that
It isn't.
impression?
It's an easy to collect tax. It is an easy. You understand exactly what it is. In some European countries, the little machine that comes out of the thing you put your credit card in will produce a piece of paper that lists the VAT on it, but it's the price. There's, you walk into a store any place in the EU and Britain, and you look at something on a shelf and it's got a price on it. That's the price. You will not pay 1 penny more. That's the price. Now the Europeans have taken to charging you for the bags, but that's another story. But that's all. But it's a simple system. You could put it into your life. You just calculate it, and you don't need an accountant to figure out. And then anything you get from the government is separate. It isn't a tax credit. You've got your income tax, you're paying your income tax, and you know exactly that you got to pay this much tax. And if you make so much money, this much tax. You can fight over how much you have to pay, but at least you don't have to get an accountant with 3 degrees and a CPA to tell you how much and charge you, $400 an hour to tell you how much you have to pay. At least you know how much you have to pay. And then it's just a question of the government using those tax earnings correctly. Scandinavian countries, which are sort of a model of social democracy, have very high VATs. And they just take the VAT money and commit it to what they think is the right thing to do. So the VAT actually comes back. And then how does it come back? It comes back with a really first-class healthcare system. I'm here in England now. And let me tell you, the NHS, with all its problems, makes us look really shameful. It's embarrassing coming out of the American system. My daughters live here, and it is simply beyond belief the how much more effective, quick, even with delays, the European systems are over the United States, and they are overall cheaper because the cost of the system is spread across the entire economy, and because of that, there are an awful lot of primary care doctors, and all the systems here in Europe and the British system concentrate on preventive care. So every European country's statistics are better than ours. They live longer than we do. They have a better life health-wise than we do. We're
Maybe we
really
should be
good.
looking to Europe as a model.
Yeah, we should. I mean, in that healthcare, look to Europe as a model. And the public schools are relatively good. In some countries, the public schools have deteriorated a bit. Here in Britain, they have. People know that, so they're shifting over to private schools, but they're still pretty good. In Italy, no one in his right mind would go to a private school unless it's just a snob thing. The public schools in Italy are just as good as the private schools.
Wow.
In Sweden, they are. I mean, it varies from country to country, but by and large, the public schools are much better than ours. So, do Europeans pay more taxes than we do? Yes. But then they get free or virtually free healthcare. The other thing the Europeans do, by the way, that really bothers me, is they negotiate with pharmaceutical companies the price of the pharmaceuticals. In the United States, there's a law that's just changed a little bit that says Medicare has to pay the top rate that the pharmaceutical company asks. Well, I forgot one of my medicines when I came here. And I had to get a prescription to get it here because I can't just get it with the American prescription. So my daughter calls a primary care doctor. I get an appointment for literally the next day. I could have gotten it that afternoon, but I couldn't get over in time. So right now I get an appointment for literally the next day. They go there. I get a fairly light examination. The blood pressure, temperature, look me in the eyes and ears, sort of thing. I've got a communication from my doctor to him as to why I need this particular medicine. And then he writes out the prescription. The cost for the visit because was a little over $200, 180 pounds. In the United States, it would have been about half again as much. Then I go down to the pharmacy in the same hospital where he was working. And this is the hospital where I got my appointment in literally less than 24 hours. And go down there, and the prescription, the total cost of the prescription, this is not insurance. I mean, I have to send this back to my insurance to get reimbursed, my supplemental to get reimbursed, but who cares? Total cost of the prescription is 10 pounds, about $14. My copay in the United States for the prescription is $20. So I went back and I asked AI, I said, how much does the US government pay for this particular medicine in the United States? And it's $399 under Medicare. How much does the British NH system pay for this particular prescription? £9.50. I paid £10.50. Basically, the hospital charged me £1
Wow.
for the fee.
Patrick, before you go, I know I've kept you a little bit longer, but I just wanted to ask really briefly here, did you have any thoughts about, I don't know if you had a chance to catch the World Economic Forum and the craziness of Trump's speech and,
Yes.
the Carney speech. I was wondering your thoughts on that.
I don't want to say this because I'm not a psychiatrist, but there's something wrong with Trump's thought process. He can memorize. I know he's got a teleprompter, but he can still memorize, but he goes off that teleprompter like mad. I forgive him the Greenland, Iceland faux pas because he was talking about all the ice in Greenland for 5 minutes before. That was an hour and 45-minute speech. I watched it on my computer, sat through the whole thing. And it was, first of all, it frightened you that the leader of the free world, the most powerful man of the world, would actually deliver that speech. I think that was the first reaction. And secondly, I think that speech is a counterpoint to the Carney speech, convinced Europeans that the United States is no longer their benefactor, their friend, or their protector, and they have to go out and take care of all those things on their own, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's sad that it happened that way. And the Carney speech was on target. But the world is going in that way. We've become more transactional as a country. We have become, I think we are reverting to the isolationism that characterized the United States before Pearl Harbor. We'd only had one big foreign adventure, which was World War I before then, and then a couple of, we knocked off some easy targets like the Spanish, but we had no other foreign wars in the interim since independence until World War I, and then we went back to our normal isolationism, and I think that is the normal state of the American people. We aren't comfortable, and the Chinese. I've had a little opportunity before COVID to go to China and meet a lot of Chinese and talk to them. Chinese are like us. They're a big continental power, and they think of the world inside China as being radically different than the world outside China. They're polite. They don't show quite the contempt for foreigners that we do from time to time. But I think inside they have the same sort of feeling. The Russians are the only continental power who always are expansionist, because they've been invaded so many times that the only way they can deal with the invasion is to invade back. So I think we're going in that direction. We're becoming much more isolationist. Trump is capitalizing on it. He didn't create it.
And I was going to say in that regard too, I hadn't seen this before, but I think you said that we're also kind of alienating our Gulf state allies, I guess, putting more risk on them.
Yeah, I think two things happened. The first one was the Israeli attack on Doha. They attacked the building that the Hamas leadership was in to negotiate, and they missed. They didn't get their target done. There's not a single person in the Arabian Peninsula that doesn't believe that we knew about it. And particularly the way the raid was described, which, by the way, I think is nonsense, is that the Israelis flew down the Red Sea, and when they got to 1,000 miles away from Qatar, they fired their missiles at Qatar. There are three things wrong with this story. One, if you look at the damage done to the building, that was done by a very small missile. A missile that travels 1,000 kilometers isn't small. So I think it was some sort of Israeli coup, like the way they did it in Iran, was they smuggled some missiles in or on a boat offshore, things very close to shore, and then fired from there into the building. Secondly, there's no plane there's no plane in any inventory in the world that could fly all the way down to be within 1,000 miles of fly down the Red Sea and be within 1,000 miles of Qatar and fly back without having tankers supporting it. And that is the F-35s may be sort of immune from radar, but tankers aren't. And that whole Red Sea is covered with Saudi air defense radars that integrate with American air defense. And there's no way that that thing happened that way. And I don't know how it happened. But what it did is it destroyed any everybody in the Gulf knows that, and it destroyed any confidence in the United States at the time. Then, just as we're beginning to get it back a little bit, Netanyahu starts talking about continuing the war against Iran and that the U.S. is going to back him. And Trump starts making some favorable noises. And the Iranians went down the Gulf and said, if they come after us big time, we're going to destroy your ability to export oil and gas. And everybody in the Gulf, I don't care what you think of the Iranians, guys, jumped on Trump to make sure it didn't happen. But that became
just because it would that have been bad for regional stability? Is that why?
It would have destroyed the economies of the Gulf states. It would have also prevented the Gulf from exporting oil and gas. So I leave that for your imagination. China and India would have suddenly run dry.
So now you have the Gulf states essentially questioning, what has been an 85-year partnership.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, since 1945.
So I know I have to let you get going. In closing, you say at the end of your piece, you're less worried about like a single catastrophe or black swan event than in cumulative erosion. Close us out with your thoughts on that. Expand on that a little bit, just for the sake of my listeners, to put a bow tie on this convo.
We have a great deal to fix in the United States before we become truly competitive. The only things that help our power right now is military power. We are not in a military confrontation with the Chinese. We're in an economic confrontation. So there are a lot of things broken, the things that I discussed, military procurement system, the defense industries, oligopolistic status, all the infrastructure that hasn't been fixed, the destruction, not the destruction really, but the damage done to our educational system from universities down. All these things need fixing, and they need focus on fixing it, not to speak of too much money in government and a tax system that costs more to run than it collects, I think, sometimes. So they're accumulation of little things that are gnawing, that are cutting away at our power, that are cutting away at our ability to win friends and influence people. And there isn't one big thing that's going to kill us. It's this death by 1,000 cuts. And first of all, we have to recognize that there's a death by 1,000 cuts. And then we have to go out and do something about them. And I don't see that happening. We have to fix immigration, but this isn't fixing immigration. This is getting rid of a workforce at the same time that we're raising tariffs, which is, frankly, economics 101 insanity. You either do one or the other, but
and it's causing domestic unrest. Everyone's afraid now. It's causing
domestic unrest. And I never thought a Minnesotan, the next revolution would come from Minnesota in the depth of winter.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/parallaxviews, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with JG Mike. To Parallax Views with JG Mike.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.